Hello everyone in Cube Nation. Welcome back to theCUBE's coverage of Axonius Adapt 2025 here in Dallas, Texas. I'm your host, Rebecca Knight, sitting alongside my co-host and analyst, Jackie McGuire. Jackie, our first ever show together.
I know, it's so exciting to be here.
And cybersecurity is your wheelhouse, so we are going to be talking data governance.
And I'm a governance nerd, so I'm actually really excited for this one. I think anybody who's heard me knows that I love compliance and governance.
I don't think that sentence has been uttered too many times before. But with that, I would like to introduce our guest. He is Luis Valenzuela, Director, Data Governance and Data Loss Prevention at Incomm Payments. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Luis.
Hello, thank you for having me. Excited.
So tell our viewers, why don't you just start by telling our viewers a little bit about Incomm Payments and what you do, what's your role there?
Yes, so Incomm Payments is one of those companies that is not known by name, but if you have ever given a gift card to a relative, chances are it came from us. Okay. So we are a card issuer and a card acquirer, and we have a big segment of the market for gift cards. And we also have other related applications like HSA cards. We have a dual card where you can have your medical expenses coming from one side of the account or your personal from one card. So most of what we do is in the payment industry, creating new technologies. And my role within the cybersecurity team, I report to the CISO. I'm responsible for data governance, data protection, data loss prevention, and I help with other aspects in connection with the GRC side, because I used to be in that side of the house. I help with operations, incident management sometimes, different other areas as part of the CISO leadership team.
And it must be an incredibly critical process because gift cards are kind of like cash, right? So,
yes.
So if you have data that's compromised, I mean, it'd be like somebody walking into the vault at a casino, right?
Yep.
And being able to just walk out.
Somebody said that we print money, in a sense, yes.
And I imagine that with the types of payments that you handle, you have all kinds of different compliance and regulation bodies that are looking at you all the time.
We abide to probably 15 different compliance frameworks or government things, NYDFS, PCI, HIPAA, high-tech. It definitely is one of our heavy areas of work.
I know there's a lot of people at home twitching.
Yes, compliance.
Imagine, because I can only imagine, there's companies like, man, we have to deal with HIPAA, and then there's companies like, man, we have to deal with FINRA. You guys are kind of the full spectrum of things.
And when they conflict in some way, it's interesting.
Yeah, that's I can't say I would want to change positions. So we were talking before we started filming about compliance and governance and data governance, and I'm gonna say AI because it's hard to have a conversation without it, but I've been looking at AI more from the data perspective, and that it's creating a lot of data. And so I want to hear how you think about these new projects that are going to potentially be creating a lot of sensitive data, and where you see kind of blind spots in the enterprise for controlling that. So what are you focused on in terms of kind of maintaining governance around data, and how you see that changing as we start to implement more and more tools?
Yeah, so I'm focusing on a handful of areas that we have determined to be the most critical ones. This is such a new area that we don't even have tools, we don't even have experts. Everybody's like trying to make it as we go. And if we think about the two main groups of AI, of actual applications, in the one hand you have machine learning, which is you grab a bunch of data and determine, or the algorithms determine patterns and to make decisions. And then on the other hand you have LLMs, which is basically an autocomplete in Aster, heavy. In both, you are using data from somewhere, and my concern is sensitive data. And in both, you are producing, there's an output of data that potentially could be sensitive data. So we have concentrated on a couple of initiatives. We have an AI committee in a company where anybody who's going to work on an AI application or bring an AI application goes to that committee, and some people who have great expertise in the legal side, in the data side, and the technology side, help to kind of carry that conversation and figure out, okay, what risks do we have, where do we go? So that's one aspect. We also suggested some aspect of changing the NDA, typical NDA that every company has. And the question is, can we put some verbiage there to start protecting ourselves from our partners using our data to feed their models?
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's a very basic concept. I didn't come up with it. I heard it when a podcast. I listen all kinds of podcasts, so I'm like, hey, that's a good idea, let's try it. Another area we're working on is protecting the users from intentionally or more likely accidentally putting sensitive data in Gen AI engines. So we have a series of controls. We started from governance, so we created those directives where we tell people this is against the rules, number one. Number two, we try to promote that across the company with pictures, with posts, with links, so people are aware that there's a danger there. And number three, we're looking into technical capabilities and tools to, even if they try to do it, to tokenize somehow or block when necessary, when there's potential sensitive data being exfiltrated. So those are kind of the main three areas that to start, we're trying to generate an impact that is something that is meaningful where we are. We don't want to block, we don't want to say don't, because people will use AI. And the way I see it is, generally speaking, depending on which numbers you use, if this is going to give 40% extra productivity to companies, they will go for it. Oh, by the way, it might be 20% hallucination or 30% chances sensitive data will be exfiltrated. Companies will take that chance. So at this point, we're just trying to work with the business and try to make things secure, but also profitable.
So that is what you're doing to make sure that you are fixing your blind spots, but we know that rapid detection is what is needed. How are you uncovering these gaps across these very diverse and fragmented IT landscapes?
Yeah, so in part the problem is not a new problem. The area that we are looking at is new. But technically it's the same problem we've had, or the same challenge we have in data governance for years, which is what's the sensitive data? How do you discover? 20 years, 10 years ago, maybe you asked the owners of business units and asked them, hey, you have sensitive data, where do you have it, how do we protect it? Now we use tools to go, and some of them based on AI algorithms, to go and find that sensitive data, PHI, PII, PHI in our case, company secrets. Some of them are easier to be found because they're mathematical matches, like credit card, 16-digit numbers, loan check, fairly easy. Social security numbers, not so easy. A little easier, but not so easy, because now we're talking about 9-digit numbers that could be a social security or an invoice number or a phone number, right? Then you go to driver licenses. Totally impossible, because there are all kinds of different structures in the different states, and this is just in the United States, where some might have a letter, some might have 5 letters, some may have 2 digits. It's a mess. So even tools have a hard time finding the right data, and we are like, how do we know? So there's a combination of technical tools and processes where if you do education with the users, that can be improved greatly. And one approach we use is, when we talk about the data governance standard, the document, we try not to make it this 100 pages, thou shalt type of document, but something very practical that has a picture, and at the end, all I need is for everybody in the company to understand what is sensitive data and the types, and what's the protection that they need to have. That's all.
I love that.
And it's actionable.
And making it simple.
Exactly, so if the tool missed it, when the scanning that we did went, the owner knows, and so they label it. This is restricted, and now we can make protection based on that label. I didn't know that was restricted, but if the owner said it, he's the data owner, we believe it. So we try to make the best with what we have.
I love the focus on training. That's that's something that I think there's been a misconception in the enterprise that's kind of a holdover from the early 2000s and 2010s of there are certain jobs in the enterprise that are tech jobs that touch sensitive data, and that's just not reality anymore. Everybody in the enterprise is touching data. We have bring your own device. We each have laptops, especially with the rise of remote work, and so I think oftentimes the training piece is what companies overlook, and that yes, you can have as many tools as you want, but if somebody screenshots something, they need to know if what's in that screenshot is sensitive data or not, and we often overlook that. I actually want to go back to a really interesting, I'm going to take it all the way back for about 5 minutes, because you mentioned an issue we call feature extraction with your AI. And so I did a talk at RSA last year about bringing security teams and the rest of enterprise teams together to build more secure AI projects. And we were talking about different compromises of large language models, and we mentioned feature extraction almost as like the third, like a side note. This is not happening, we don't see this much in the wild, and then all of a sudden you have DeepSeek that comes out, and it's like, oh, well, DeepSeek may have been, extracting features from OpenAI. So I think it's really fascinating to think about just in the last year, and I think you're one of many companies I've heard that from, and that so many companies have put so much time, effort, and money into these models that that's become, just in a matter of under a year, a huge issue. So I just wanted to highlight that because I think it's one of the major ways the market is starting to shift, in that as we invest more and more in these models, there are more incentives for adversaries to try to take what you spent a lot of money on as cheaply as possible. So I just wanted to bring us back to that to highlight it, because I love that you guys are actively focused on that. What else is kind of top of mind for you right now as you look into the future, as you look into a more connected enterprise, with particularly with more layers of abstraction? Because that's what I see happening in software right now, is everybody wants to be a platform, and so we're putting kind of these layers of abstraction on top of things. What are you focused on as kind of like the next big challenge in like data governance, in maintaining control over data?
Well, one area that I've been looking at very heavily is the sprawl of SaaS data in SaaS applications, where 20 years ago, all of the corporate data, HR, finance, everything was in one of the servers of our server farm within the building that has firewalls around and all of the DR, everything's there, so it's secure, right?
Yeah.
Move 20 years later, and especially the last few years it's been growing, more of that corporate data, let alone production data, is in some SaaS application, is in Salesforce, is in Work, all of these applications. And the difference is that 20 years ago, as long as we have encryption and we have maybe labeling if somebody was advanced enough at that point, we can protect it. Now we have no idea what data is where, what kind of protection. We can apply one encryption or one firewall for everything because we have 20, 30, 50, 100 different websites that our users are going to upload data. Then it becomes like managing 500 different environments.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking at right now. Okay, how do we, in the most effective way, do the inventory of all of the SaaS applications our company uses, have the level of visibility we need as to where sensitive data resides, because not all needs to be looked at, but where do we have employee records, customers records, PCI, all of that. And then after that, what do we do to make sure it's protected? Because SaaS applications have been breached for the last 5-10 years, very known ones. So that's kind of my next challenge. How do we protect that data and make sure that the next time one of those guys get compromised, our data is secure?
Yeah, that's a challenge because you almost have to develop parallel standards, because some of that is running in your cloud organizations, right? And then some of these SaaS things are actually running in somebody else's cloud organization.
They all
there's
are.
Only so much you can do,
Yes.
and only so much you can ask them or the vendor's willing to divulge about their security posture. So that kind of secondary and tertiary layer of risk, I see vendors starting to get into that space to explore that, but we've got to a place where SBOM is probably not going to cover things anymore.
And in this case, we're talking about SBOM times 100.
Yeah.
So we might come to the point where, in as much as everything moves more into technology and AI, this might be one of those things that we need to revert to a more process-driven, human-driven process, where we will have to maybe go back to the identify the owner, have a meeting, have a document, have some sort of more manual process to be able to know where the data is, how we control it, and find kind of some point in between where we can have a level of security that is acceptable without impeding the business. Because I can go to tell everybody, you cannot put data in any SaaS unless we approve it. They will find a way around it, for sure. And there are certain applications that there's only one provider that does it well, and that's it.
Yeah.
So we try to protect our data, we try to control that, and we hope all of these providers have a good security process and that is resilient. basically.
Yeah.
I want to pick up a little bit on what you were saying, especially in relation to what Dean Sisman, who is the CEO, obviously, and founder here at Axonius, said on the main stage this morning about creating this movement toward actionability. So having the visibility, but then also being able to extract the insights to be able to execute on them.
Yes.
What was your take on his idea of starting this movement, and is it so deeply necessary at this point in time?
No, I totally agree from the particular standpoint that I've been having some conversations recently, both internally and with vendors that offer services to us. And my question or my conclusion came to the point like, do I need to know more weaknesses? Like, it's not like I don't know where we have weaknesses, right? I'm trying to figure out how we cover our weaknesses, and so is every one of my peers, and how do we find budget? How do we cover in the most effective way? The problem is not that we don't know of vulnerabilities or issues of weakness. The problem is that we don't know what to do with what we already know.
When everything's a critical alert,
right?
nothing's
so
a critical alert.
at some point I asked in a meeting, do we really need more evidence? Or do we need to fix first what we know exists, right?
Yeah.
Now we have what we believe is a very mature security program, and we take care of our bases. But still, yes, I could find or get a tool, get more of those. The question is, how do we go to that next step where not only we know what's wrong, but either we get a solution from the vendor, or we come up with a solution and we start addressing and reducing. I love when I can report to management, okay, last week we had this many, this week we had this many.
Yeah.
And this week or if we have the same, it's because they came new ones, right? I think that's the challenge, and in some way insecurity, since cybersecurity is not the number one risk to a company, there are other higher risks like interest rates, markets, political, geopolitical stuff. Sometimes being good enough, or some people call it minimum acceptable level, or however you want to mean, sometimes being in the 80% is fine because you're covering all of your bases. There's always a X% that you can get to. Obviously, depending on if we're talking about XDR, we want 100%. But generally speaking, we cannot let perfection to be the enemy of good enough.
Yeah.
And so we try to include that idea into the approach.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with what he said. It's better to get from a tool something that we automated to remediate than to just get more alerts.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you point that out, because no two companies' security stacks are the same, and I think there's a lot of retail therapy, and that we had this issue, and then we're going to buy this tool, and this is going to solve the issue, and it's like, but that created 6 additional issues, 6 pools of data that now somebody needs to be responsible for, and I think that we've gotten to a point where we are inundated with problems, and there needs to be a better way to assess the criticality of those problems on a per entity basis, because criticality of internal firewall logs for you may not be the same as internal firewall logs for a data center or a clean room. And so I could not agree more that we need to move to where we're actually, everything's broken. We've all been to the oil change places where they give you a $1,200 bill, because you can always find things to fix. The question is, what are the important things to fix, right?
What the highest risk. And I was just, in the previous talk that we just had, I was mentioning how I'm bringing cyber risk quantification into our organization in a little sneaky way. It's not the official way, but I'm making it a point when I ask for budget or request or request action from a group. I don't talk about millions and lows, or I just say we have a $5 million, potentially a $5 million exposure here that only will take you X. Right? Yeah. And by that, and I'm using real data, I'm using statistical data, cyber insurance type of data, DFIR, all of this. I made my calculations in advance. So when I'm saying this is not, that is not true, and I'm telling, hey, you want to accept the risk that if we get popped on that particular device, you are the one who say no, so we lose $5 million.
Yeah.
Are you okay with that?
CISOs, take note, please. and everything has to tie back to revenue or cost saved, cost avoided.
Yes.
If you
so
don't,
that has helped me to get other peers within the IT team to help me to get a ticket done, a patching, whatever it is that we're asking them to do. And that kind of builds into the big picture of where do we put the few resources that we have available.
Strategic security.
I love
Yeah.
it. Great advice. Great advice. As you said, CISOs take note. Luis, thank you so much for coming on theCUBE. A really fascinating conversation.
All right, thank you, it was fun.
I'm Rebecca Knight for Jackie McGuire. Stay tuned for more of theCUBE's live coverage of Axonius Adapt. You're watching theCUBE, the leader in enterprise tech news and analysis.